Caprica Soapery, and I'm here today in the Bramble studio, which is super exciting for me, to teach you how to make these lovely little landscape soaps. These soaps use a technique which is commonly referred to as a sculpted layer technique, which involves pouring a layer of soap and then scraping it back into a shape, and that's how we get these beautiful tree lines and the mountain shape here. So to make this technique, we're going to use these scraping tools. These particular ones were made by Belinda at Love Your Suds, and she has a variety of different shapes, techniques, different scrapers that you can use. You can also make your own at home. I typically use stencil paper for mine, where I draw out the design that I want, and then I'll cut it to fit my mold. You can use cardboard, you can use plastic, kind of anything that you can cut to a semi-rigid shape will let you be able to replicate this if you don't want to buy your own scrapers. So this is a technique that I really love. I was recently able to compete on a crafting competition series called Meet Your Maker Showdown on Discovery Plus, where I had a chance to compete against 3 other fantastic cold process and melt and pour soap makers. And one of the designs that I made for the show was a sculpted layer just like this. So this will be your chance to learn all the tricks of the trade. This is a slightly more advanced technique. Not that the scraping is particularly challenging, but it does require a good understanding of when your soap is at trace, what the different types of trace are, light, medium, or thick, and a good ability to gauge when the batter is ready to be scraped. You don't want it to be not too soft, but not too set up either. So as I'm getting ready to start handling my ingredients, I want to make sure I've got my long sleeves pulled down, and I like to tuck them into my gloves just so I don't have any dangling edges, and that way my skin is protected from any lye or any other chemicals. So first I've got my fragrance I'm going to use, which is Backwoods Hike. This fragrance is a really lovely kind of musky cologne fragrance mixed with kind of a pine forest outdoor smell. To me it smells like a lumberjack getting ready to chop down some trees. It's a really, really nice fragrance. I've got this already weighed out, and I did check to make sure that this fragrance doesn't discolor and doesn't accelerate. I tend to work a bit warm with my oils, so they do set up quickly. If you prefer to work cooler, or you won't want to have to wait as long in between your layers, you can use a fragrance that accelerates a little bit as well. That will help firm your layers up more quickly so that you can get ready to scrape sooner. I have my oils already measured out, ready to go. As you can possibly see, they're a little bit cloudy, which is something you want to keep an eye on with this technique. I like to have all of my oil and all of my lye in one master batch, and then we'll measure off the amount we need for each layer. So as you're working, it's important to make sure your oils aren't getting too cool, because if they get cloudy and they're too cool, you can get false trace, which will make your batter separate later, and we don't want that. So I'm going to pop these in the microwave and just warm them up a little bit, and then we'll be ready to go. Here I have all of my oils weighed out and ready to go. They're nice and warm, they're clear, so I know that they're warm enough. I have all of my lye solution, which has already been prepped and cooled. So this is enough oil and lye to make the entire batch. And from here, we're going to section it out into smaller layers that are ratioed correctly so that we can pour each layer of the soap separately. What this does is allows us to have that 10 to 20 minutes between layers without the rest of my batter turning to soap in the pot. So we're ready to measure off our first layer. Got my little handy dandy scale. I like to work in grams because I find it to be the most precise way of measuring, but you can also work in ounces, whatever you're most familiar with and most comfortable with, but you do want to make sure everything is weighed. I have my second mixing bowl tared on my scale, and for this first layer I want 1,058 grams of oil. So I'm going to give these a stir, make sure they're nicely dispersed, and then I'll start weighing it out. This recipe that I'm using is one that was developed kind of specifically for sculpted layers. It's really helpful to have a high percentage of butters when you're using this technique. This recipe has, I think it's 17% butters, and it's available for you in the link with the video. Having that high percentage of butters is nice because it does help your layers set up nice and firmly, but also you want the batter to have a good texture so that when you scrape, it's kind of creamy and it will scrape back. If the recipe is too thick or has too many kind of waxy oils or even too much coconut oil, it tends to kind of crumple as you scrape it, and it will make it more challenging to get those fine details. So this is our first batch of oils. This will be for the bottom layer, which in this case is the tree layer. Now I'm going to measure out my lye solution, and I want 451 grams of lye. So this is my batched lye solution. It's got my lye and my water. And it's also got my sodium lactate added to it. So we mixed the lye and the water and let that cool down to, it's a little bit above room temperature. And then I add my sodium lactate to my lye solution. I find that's the easiest way to make sure I don't forget it in the layer, or that I don't end up mixing something up along the way. One thing that I forgot to mention when I was talking about the recipe and master batching is that I did also already add my fragrance oil to these oils. I do that before I section it out. That way all of the fragrance is incorporated. I don't have to worry about figuring out how much needs to go in each layer. It's just another one of my oils and it gets divided up evenly. From here, I'm going to add my colorant to my base layer. So this is the tree layer and this will be black. So I have black iron oxide, which is dispersed in oil here in like a light carrier oil. And I'm going to measure out, I think, about 4 teaspoons of this. 1, 2. When you add your colors to your oils, it's kind of a matter of personal preference. I like to add it to my liquid oils before I incorporate my lye, just so that I can make sure it's really well dispersed and mixed in, and I don't have to worry about my batter setting up before I've gotten my colors all incorporated. Or with colors like titanium dioxide, which we'll use in the mountain layer, those tend to benefit from a little bit of a stick blend in the oils just to really help you not get any specks or spots. So that's personal preferences to put mine in with my oils, but you can add them whenever is most comfortable for you in the process. So this is all prepped and ready to go. Before I mix my lye, I want to confirm that my scrapers are set to the right height for my mold. So to do that, I'm going to grab my mold, I'm going to grab my scraper tool, and you can see it's assembled with this little crossbar that goes on with these nuts and bolts. What this does is make sure that as I'm scraping, the scraper stays at the right height in the loaf. So I'm just going to set this down inside. I'll turn it around so you can see. And these scrapers are great in that they have these little guidelines along the way so you can make sure you know exactly how high it's set. For this design, I want the trees to come all the way to the bottom of the mold, so I have my scraper set to where it's just a couple of millimeters above the silicone. I want it to almost touch, but not be so low that it's going to scrape into my silicone in the bottom. So as you may have noticed, I wear glasses already, but to be super safe, when I start to mix my lye, I'm going to put my handy-dandy safety goggles on instead. These are designed to go over my glasses and just prevent me getting any lye splashes into my eyes, because we don't want that. I've got a spatula, and I'm going to pour my lye over this spatula into my oil solution, and that will just help make sure that I don't get any bubbles incorporated and minimize the risk of splashing. I'm going to pour nice and slowly, and just give that a quick scrape to make sure I get all of it out. From here, I'm going to add my stick blender and give it a little shake to make sure there's no bubbles trapped underneath it. It's called burping your stick blender. I'm going to start just giving this a few pulses. You will notice that I stick blend this probably a little more than you would normally stick blend a batch. It's not a big deal if it gets a little bit thick, but we do want to make sure we avoid false trace, which is where it looks like it's come together, but it actually is a lie. So we can see we're at kind of a medium trace here. I'll always lift up my bell and just take a look at the batter that remains on it, and that gives me a good indication of if I'm at trace or not. I can see if the oils are starting to separate back out or if they're staying nicely bound together. This is a nice emulsion, so we're going to move on to pouring. I'm going to pour this into my mold. You can see we're pretty thick. That's totally fine. And I'm going to make sure I scrape my bowl. My giant bowl. Then I'm just going to use my spatula to kind of smooth out the layer. Again, you don't have to be overly precise in this step. You just want to make sure the batter is in and that it's layered nice and deep. At this point, I like to take my scraper and just check that my batter is deep enough. This is a quick way to have a little second check. I'm going to push it down, and I just want to make sure that the batter is deeper than the top of my sculpted design. You can see nice and clearly that it is. It comes over the top of the tallest tree, and now we wait. It takes about, I would say usually between 10 and 15 minutes for the layer to set up thick enough to scrape. And so as soon as this is set up, we'll come back and we'll scrape our cheese. So it has been about 10 minutes, and as you can see, this is pretty firm. This is kind of the consistency that you want. You want it to be pretty well set up so that it will hold its shape. I've got my scraper ready to go. My guidelines are set, and I'm gonna put this in the back of the mold. I like to pull towards me. I find I have the most control, and it's the easiest way to get the design nice and steady. So you want nice even pressure. You don't really want to push down. You just want to make sure that it's the top of the silicone. That will be your guide. And you're going to pull gently towards you. As you do that, you will see that there are big volumes of batter curling up in front. This is a technique that uses a lot of extra batter. I know it seems wasteful. I like to scrape this batter out into a little side mold, and I actually use these as fragrance samples in my orders. So while you're not necessarily making loaves with the leftovers, you are still getting something useful out of it and minimizing waste where you can. I'm gonna just keep working my way down the mold, kind of pulling a couple inches at a time and then scraping out my extra into this little side mold. And again, I know it seems like it's wasteful, but it's all soap, it all washes. You can kind of get a good gauge of how thick this batter is too as you're watching me scrape it into this little side mold. It's pretty sturdy, and that's what we want. When you get to the end of the loaf, it can be a little bit more challenging to scrape because you can't really lift these up as you go. They're carving a pattern, so you want to bring it all the way to the end and then kind of curl it towards the edge to push that batter up. And then I'm just going to pass back over this the same way, like 3 or 4 more times. I want to really make sure that my pattern is nice and smooth. You can see kind of as I work along the loaf, I get these little marks in the batter where I stopped to scoop, and I want to smooth those out. I'm still getting little bits of buildup in front of the scraper, which is what I want, and then when you get to the end, it is kind of hard to scoop it out. Don't be afraid to get a little messy. This technique is not for the faint of heart. You will get messy. It's just the nature of doing sculpted layers. And it's kind of done when it stops scraping up extra batter in front of the scraper. And you can just use the end of your spatula to kind of clean up the little messy bits on the mold. It is kind of important to make sure that you scrape up this buildup that gets along the edges and along the front and back of the mold, because when you scrape your next layer, you don't want to incorporate that black batter. You don't want that to get scraped into your next layer. I just use a spatula and kind of run it down the end of the mold, being careful not to mess up my design. But you can see how I'm just cleaning up the edges. All right, now we're gonna leave this alone for probably another 10 minutes or so, just to let it get really nice and hard and firm before I pour my next layer on top of it. While those sculpted trees over here finish setting up, I'm gonna measure out my second layer, which is gonna be my mountain layer. So we're gonna start with measuring out our oils. And for this layer, I want 823 grams of my oil solution. I have now my oils and my lye hiding behind my oils, weighed out for the second layer of this pour, which is going to be the mountains. So we're going to fill in these spaces behind the trees, and then when we scrape this layer, we're going to be scraping this line. So we'll be scraping the top of the mountain. Got my scraper ready to go, and you can see how it lines up with the top of the mountain. So we want this layer to be at like a light trace. And you'll notice how with the black, I added my colors first, but with this layer, I'm actually gonna pour a little bit of this off to make the gray that swirls into my mountain. So I don't wanna add my titanium dioxide just yet. So from here, I'm gonna pour off just a little bit of this batter. I'm really just eyeballing it. You just want a little bit to mix the color in. So I'm gonna pour off just a little bit there. And to this main batch, I'm gonna add my titanium dioxide. So again, I have my titanium dioxide, which is pre-dispersed in oil. We'll do 2½ teaspoons here. And then we're gonna stir this in. The nice thing about having your titanium dioxide kind of pre-dispersed in oil is that it helps eliminate any specks that you might get. So really, you can just stir this in. You don't have to stick blend the color in. Then for a little bit of black, I'm gonna add about 1/4 teaspoon to this. Really, I just wanna color it. It doesn't need to be a lot. As you can see, it's such a tiny volume of batter. We just wanna tint it and just get that mixed in. Then I'm just gonna drizzle that into here. and kind of from a little bit of a height, you want to just kind of drizzle it in all mixed. You don't want to try and clump it up. I'm not trying to make this gray. I just want to have black kind of swirled in with it to give it that mountainy texture. And then I'm going to give this just a couple of quick kind of folds to get a little bit of a swirl pattern. And then we're going to pour. You want to pour gently. You don't want to smush your trees. I like to kind of start from one side and just let it creep along. And that kind of helps mitigate the risk of any air pockets as well. Again, kind of smooth it down a little bit, being careful not to mix your colors too much. Like I mentioned, you don't want to turn this gray. And then I like to just give it a couple of quick taps to make sure there's no air bubbles. And then again, we're going to let this layer set up for about 8 to 10 minutes. You'll kind of have to look at it and gauge, but that will be ready to scrape then. While this is setting up, just like we did with the first one, I've gone ahead and set this to the height that I want it, but you want to just double check. Set it down in the mold. We're going to scoot some batter. So as you can see, we're not quite covering our design, but because this is a little bit thick, I want to just make sure that it's evenly scooted along so that it's not higher on one side than the other. So we'll set this back down, we'll check our height. Now we look pretty good. We're just overlapping the top of our mountain and we're ready to scrape. All right, it has been about 10 minutes now and this has set up nice and firm. Again, you can see it's not going anywhere and we're ready to scrape. And it's the same process as before. So we're gonna slide it in and then gently pull towards us to sculpt the layer. So as I pull back, this layer is removing less batter, so I can go a little bit further before I have to stop and do a little bit of extra batter removal. And then I'm going to pull through again, using the same technique as I did for the trees. I just want to make sure that I'm getting a nice, smooth, even scrape. If you notice, sometimes you will see kind of right here at the top of this mountain how there's a little bit concave. It's like there's a little bit of an air bubble, and then it's happening again kind of here and here. And so to fix that, we can take a little bit of our overpour and just kind of blob it on top. We just want a little bit of extra batter to be able to kind of fill that space. And so then again, I'll put my scraper in. And as I pull back now, that extra batter will get pushed down into that space. And that looks beautiful. That's nice and smooth. And then this can let sit for a few minutes. It can firm up the rest of the way, and then we'll come back to pour the last layer. Last but not least is our third layer, which is the top of the soap, which is going to be this swirly kind of rainbow Aurora Borealis inspired layer. So we're going to weigh out our oils and our lye solution and then get that last layer on the road. And I did have to pop these back into the microwave. They'd been sitting for long enough that they were pretty cloudy, so now you can see they're nice and clear. I'm going to give them a quick stir just to make sure they're all nicely incorporated. Now this is going to be added to my mold on top of the existing soap in kind of a abbreviated one pot wonder format to get those swirls. So we're going to get a separate little pitcher for each of the 5 colors that we're using. So these were mixed ahead of time and the mica was dispersed in avocado oil. It was 1 teaspoon of mica powder to 1 tablespoon of oil, and you can see they're pretty nicely dispersed here, which is what we want. From here, I'm going to just slide these out of the way so that I don't end up spilling them. And I'm going to section out, I'm going to add my lye water to my oils, and then I'm going to section it out evenly between these 5. I'm going to give this a little gentle pulse. And again here, I'm just looking for a light trace. I want this to stay pretty fluid. So This last layer is the layer where you really do want to be mindful of your temperature. If your oil has cooled off too much, this is the layer where you're most likely to get a false trace, is that top layer. I did reheat these oils to kind of help make sure that that didn't happen to us. I think we're looking pretty good. Things seem to be stable and holding emulsion, which is what we want. And now that I have my batter and my lye solution incorporated, I'm just going to divide it up evenly between these 5 pitchers. And this is you can eyeball this. It's pretty loosey-goosey. It doesn't have to be very accurate. Just kind of use your best eyeballing to divide it into kind of 5 equal parts. And I'm going to add my colors. I did mix up about a tablespoon of mica here. You don't need that much. I'll say I'll probably use about 1/3 of this. It's a tiny amount of soap batter. We really just want enough to color it. With these very small volumes of batter, we don't want to add too much oil so that it doesn't set up. Give these a good stir. Oops, little splash. This is why we wear safety gear. This is probably my favorite part of soap making. I find mixing the colors in to be the most satisfying. I really love adding the mica and seeing it turn the white batter into these beautiful jewel tones. And the second to last step here is going to be layering these 5 colors into one pitcher that we're going to pour from. So this is kind of based on a one-pot wonder technique, if you're familiar with that, where we're going to layer the soap into one pitcher and then use this pitcher to run back and forth. And that's just giving us the color gradient in that top layer. If you want to just use one color, you can. If you want to use 2, 3, 4, 5, it's entirely up to you. I like the look that this gives, and so this is the technique we're going to use here, but you can adjust to whatever you're comfortable with. So when you're pouring from a one pot like this, it's important to know that you need to layer your colors backwards. So the color you put in first is the color that's going to come out of the pitcher last. So for me, I want these pinks and purples to be closest to the mountain, and I want these blues and greens to be the top layer. So we're going to start with these. So we're just going to angle this pitcher, and we're going to pour down the side of it. We want to try and get as much of this out as possible. From there, we'll move to our next color, which is going to be this kind of smoky blue. And again, we're going to angle and just pour right down the side. Next is our slightly darker blue. And again, just repeat the process. I'm going to work kind of quickly here. So as you can see, this is starting to set up a little bit, so I'm going to work a little bit quickly. Just because I really want to get it all in here before it's too thick. And our last color is this gorgeous raspberry pink. And same thing, I'm going to kind of pour it down the side. And then from here, we're going to take our mold, we're going to tilt it, and we're going to run this back and forth along the edge, letting our colors kind of layer out. And so you'll see kind of as they're layered in the pot, we get this gradient effect as we pour them out. And as the mold fills up, we'll kind of give it a little tilt and help it over to the other side. We want to make sure that we're covering our mountain. And then you can use your spatula and give this a little scrape to get those last little bits of green and blue out. And this should give us a really nice kind of swirly ombre effect in that top layer. Just going to smooth out my top layer. And if you want to, you can use the extras to make a little design on the top. I kind of like just to swirl it a little bit back and forth. And then from here, you'll want to give this a good kind of 12 to 24 hours to set up and turn into soap. If you do like to oven process your soaps, at this point you can go ahead and pop it in your warmed oven or in a heating pad, or if you prefer to leave things just out at room temperature, whatever your normal method is for that. And in about 24 hours or so, this should be ready to cut. So this is a loaf that I made about 2 days ago, and it's ready to get out of the mold. You can see it's all nice and firm, set up, ready to go. And so we're gonna go ahead and unmold it, which is gonna involve just sliding out this bottom panel right here. And that will let us push the silicone liner out of the wood frame a little easier. So we'll set that down, reframe myself here. And I like to stand these up to get it out, but it kind of depends on what your personal preference is. You can also just lift the wood right off of it, and then you can kind of wiggle it out. And then we're left with our silicone. Our next step is going to be to peel back the silicone, and this will release the loaf from the sides, and that will make it much easier for it to slide out. So just loosen up all 4 sides. And then again, I like to stand these up to get them out. You can do it on the side as well if you prefer, but this is pretty firm, so I'm going to stand it up and I'll face it. And then just kind of gently press from the bottom, and you can see how the silicone has released. And then we can kind of slide the loaf out. Ta-da! So before I cut my loaves, I like to just clean up these edges to get these little loose parts off. And so I'm just using a little clay tool here, and I'm going to just run it along the very edge and just clean up that little edge. And we're going to cut this using the multi-bar cutter, which you can see right here. It will cut multiple bars for us at once, nice and quick and efficient. And for this, we open it up, and then we'll load the loaf into the cutter. Make sure that it's seated nice and flush against the little guide rails. And then this little end piece will fall as we cut. You can see it's a little bit too long for the cutter to get it all at once, so I'm just going to put a hand under it. Are we ready? And nice, firm, even pressure. All the way down. This is always the most exciting part. You can see these actually came out really nicely. We've got some black trees. I love the way the white and black and gray kind of swirled together to give the texture on the mountain. And then we're going for an Aurora Borealis sky, so kind of fading from pink to purple to blue to green. And it's always so fun as you pull apart a loaf. Every slice is just a little bit different. It's like a little surprise in every bar. So now these are all unmolded. They're ready to be cleaned up a little bit if you would like to bevel your edges or do any other kind of prep. They smell super good. This fragrance, again, was Backwoods Hike. From this point, you want to let your bars cure for 4 to 6 weeks. That will help them harden. They'll be safer to use. They'll have a better lather. They'll be ready to go there. And yeah, after that, gonna get ready to get lathered up. I'd like to take a moment just to thank Brambleberry for having me here today. This has been a really fun experience, and I'm glad I got to share this technique with you. I hope you guys will give this a try at home. And don't forget to check out the Scrapers by Belinda at Love Your Suds. These are a super versatile tool, and there should be links below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit subscribe. How dare you bring me such peasant wear? Betty and Marie doesn't get dirty gloves. It's been 84 years, and now we're ready to scrape. Yeah, kind of musky.
Sultry, yeah.
Sultry. Sultry forest hike to a seductive waterfall. Yeah. Start that over?
Yeah.